Touch her and I'll bury you. Mafia boss found the waitress tied up and faced the whole gang. The clock on the wall of Milo's diner showed 10 minutes past midnight. Lena Marlowe dragged a damp rag across the last stainless steel counter. The smell of stale coffee and fried onions clinging to her apron like a second skin. Her sneakers, worn through at the soles, squeaked on the checkerboard linoleum. Weary was not the word. Hollowed out felt closer. Every joint in her body ached, a dull, rhythmic throb that beat in time with the flickering neon sign outside. River Haven in November was a special kind of cold. It did not just bite, it gnawed, seeping into the concrete and into the bones. Lena pulled her thin cardigan tighter, checking her phone. No new messages, just the old ones. A bright red, past due notification from the power company, and a text from her landlord. Mr. Sokolov, rent is late. Lena, I am coming by tomorrow. The simple words made her stomach clench into a cold, hard knot. Sokolov did not just want the rent. He never just wanted the rent. He wanted interest. The way his oily gaze had lingered on her chest the last time he came to check the plumbing made her skin crawl. She had $17.42 in tips in her pocket, barely enough for the bus and a loaf of bread. She turned to lock the front door, her mind spinning on the terrible math of her life, when she noticed the two men in the last booth. They had been there for an hour, nursing 2 black coffees, their voices a low rumble she had easily ignored. Now, in the empty diner, their words cut through the silence. Shipments landed, one of them growled. He was built like a vending machine, all thick neck and flat nose. Vico's pissed about the body. The other, a skinnier man, said he was picking at a loose thread on the cracked red vinyl. Said it was sloppy, leaving him by the docks, stupid. He didn't leave us a choice, the big one grunted. He saw the jackal tattoo. Had to be done. Lena froze, her hand halfway to the deadbolt. Red jackals. Her blood went colder than the November air outside. Everyone in River Haven knew that name. You did not say it loud. You did not even think it loud. They were the gutter-level rumors. The reason the cops walked in pairs south of the river. The whispers of violence that kept the city afraid. Murder. She did not breathe. She just needed to get out. Forgetting the front door, she pivoted silently on her worn-out sole and headed for the back exit, pushing through the swinging kitchen doors. The alley was her usual shortcut, a narrow gap between brick buildings that smelled of wet garbage and bleach. Tonight, it felt like a trap. She eased the heavy metal door open, wincing at the high-pitched groan of its hinges. She slipped into the darkness. "Hey!" The voice from the diner booth was sharp, barking. She heard the scrape of the booth as they stood up. Lena did not look back. She ran. Her feet pounded the cracked pavement, splashing through a puddle of indeterminate filth. She did not stop running for 3 solid blocks, finally collapsing against a brick wall, gasping for air that felt like broken glass in her lungs. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. She risked a glance over her shoulder. The alley entrance was dark, empty, but she felt their eyes on her. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her more than the wind. They had seen her. Sleep was impossible. When the gray morning sun finally illuminated the anxiety in her tiny studio, she called in sick to Milo's, sacrificing a day's pay she could not afford. Sokolov was due. She spent the morning rehearsing what to say, how to sound desperate enough to appease him, but not so desperate that it invited what he really wanted. By noon, the silence was deafening. She had to get out, just for coffee, just to breathe air that was not thick with dread. When she pulled on her coat, she found her front door slightly ajar, just a crack. "Mr. Sokolov?" she called out, her voice trembling, weak. Silence, not a creak, not a footstep. She pushed the door open. The dread that had been simmering all night flash-boiled into pure, cold terror. It was not Sokolov. This was different. Her apartment, her tiny safe space, was destroyed. But destroyed was the wrong word. It was Violated, her single mattress was slashed open, white stuffing pulled out like guts. The cheap particle board dresser was overturned, its drawers pulled out. Her clothes, the few she had, were not just thrown, they were torn and scattered in the kitchenette. A bag of flour had been ripped open, dusting every surface in a pale, ghostly white, like a morgue sheet. Her heart pounding. She scrambled to her hiding spot, a loose floorboard under the sink. The emergency $200 were still there. Her laptop, old and slow, was still on the table, its screen dark, untouched. They had not come to rob her. They had come to send a message. We know where you live. We can touch anything you own. We can get to you. This was worse than theft. This was a promise. Across town, in a penthouse office that pierced the River Haven smog, Damien Vascari watched a live feed on a high-definition monitor. The feed was grainy, sourced from a microcamera illegally installed on a light pole. It showed the hallway outside Lena Marlowe's apartment. He saw her stumble back out of the doorway, one hand clamped over her mouth, the other shaking by her side. They were thorough, a voice said from the shadows of the office. Damien did not turn. His suit, a custom charcoal wool tailored to his large frame, was immaculate. He had not loosened his tie. They're amateurs. They're loud. They're making a mess in my city. They're the Red Jackals, boss, the voice replied. Vico Renner's dogs. They're all loud, and they're moving on my territory, Damien said, his voice a low, placid rumble that held the threat of an earthquake. He tapped a key, and the feed switched to a dossier. Lena Marlowe, 24 years old, parents deceased, 0 connections, works 60 hours a week at Milo's Diner, overdue on rent, landlord Leonid Sokolov, a lowlife with minor human trafficking ties. His man, Elio, stepped into the light. Elio was the one who had brought her to Damien's attention 2 days prior. Long before the diner incident, Sokolov had been bragging in a Vascari-owned bar, saying he was about to collect from his pretty tenant. Damien Vascari had a deep, visceral hatred for men like Sokolov. He had put eyes on the landlord, which, by extension, put eyes on Lena. She's clean, Elio stated, his face impassive. She was clean, Damien corrected, his gaze fixed on the monitor. Lena had sunk to the hallway floor, her shoulders shaking in silent sobs. Now the jackals think she's a witness. They've marked her. What's the play? She's a civilian. It's not our business. Damien watched the woman on the screen. He saw the way she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold her own pieces together. He saw resilience there, buried deep under layers of fear and exhaustion. She was not just in danger, she was marked for disposal. They left her apartment to flush her out, Damien said, his voice flat. They'll wait until dark. They'll grab her when she runs, or when she goes back to that diner. She has nowhere else to go. He stood, his full height and breadth seeming to suck the light from the room. Follow her. Keep the phone tracker active. When they take her, you call me, no one else. Just me. Boss, taking on the jackals for a civilian, Elio began, the closest he ever came to questioning an order. Damien finally turned. His eyes, the color of cold steel, pinned Elio in place. She's innocent. They put their hands on her world. They don't get to put their hands on her. Lena did not call the police. In River Haven, calling the cops was pointless unless you were rich and actively dangerous if you were poor. She spent hours cleaning, her hands shaking so badly she kept dropping the trash bags. She taped another bag over the slashed mattress. She had to work. She could not lose the job. Terror was a luxury she could not afford, not when rent was due. As evening fell, the shadows in her ruined apartment felt heavier, alive. She could not stay. She could not force herself to walk to the bus stop. She was trapped. She packed her only backpack with her laptop, the $200, and a change of clothes. She would go to the 24-hour bus station, just sit there, think. Maybe she could catch a bus to anywhere else. She made it 2 blocks. A black van, the kind with no side windows, screeched to the curb, cutting her off before she could even process the threat. 2 men were out, the same 2 men from the diner, the vending machine and the skinny one. A gloved hand clamped over her mouth. the smell of old leather and sweat filling her nostrils. An arm like a steel band wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet as if she weighed nothing. She kicked, but her feet hit nothing but air. "We told Vico she hurt us," the skinny one hissed, pulling her into the van's dark interior. The side door slid shut, and the world vanished. The van smelled of rust and something coppery, metallic, blood. Her backpack was ripped away. Rough hands bound her wrists with a zip tie, pulling it tight enough to cut into her skin. Thick, silver tape was slapped over her mouth, high enough to pinch the bridge of her nose. The drive was terrifyingly short. 10 minutes, maybe 15, of bumps and sharp turns. She was hauled out, thrown over a shoulder like a sack of grain, and carried into a building. The air was cold, damp, and smelled of mildew and old iron. The sound of a heavy metal door sliding shut echoed behind them, sealing her in. She was thrown onto a concrete floor. The impact knocked the wind from her, the sharp pain radiating through her hip. They dragged her to a steel support pillar and tied her to it with thick, abrasive rope, binding her chest and arms to the cold metal. They ripped the tape from her mouth. She screamed, the sound raw and thin in the vast, dark space. "Scream all you want, little mouse." The big one laughed, his voice bouncing off the high ceiling. "Vico's on his way. He just wants to know who you work for. Who you told." "I didn't tell anyone," Lena cried, tears blurring the dim shapes of the warehouse. "I don't work for anyone. I'm just a waitress. Please, I didn't hear anything." "They all say that," the skinny one said. He stepped closer and pulled a knife from his pocket, flicking it open. The click was the loudest sound she had ever heard. "We'll wait for the boss." He leaned in, and Lena squeezed her eyes shut, turning her face away. She felt the flat of the blade tap her cheek. It was freezing cold. "Please," she whispered, the tremor in her voice consuming her. This was it. This was how she died. Overdue rent, a creepy landlord, and 2 men in a diner. Damien Viscari's Bentley Continental moved through the industrial district like a shark gliding through black water. Elio sat in the passenger seat. Another man, Rocco, a mountain of quiet muscle, sat in the back. "Tracker stable. They're in the old shipyard, warehouse 4, Elio reported, his voice calm, monitoring a tablet. 3 heat signatures inside, her and the 2 from the diner. "Vico?" Damien asked, his voice low. No sign. They're holding her for him. Damien's jaw was a granite cliff. His hands, resting on his knee, were perfectly still. He wore a dark suit, but he had shed the jacket. A black leather shoulder holster was strapped to his chest, the custom grip of his pistol dark against his crisp white shirt. The car slid to a halt a block away, its engine a low, expensive purr. "Rocco, the back door. Elio, with me," Damien ordered. "No one calls Vico. No one leaves." They moved like ghosts, inside the warehouse. Lena heard the skinny man pace. "Maybe I'll just cut her a little," he mused. "Just a small one before the boss gets here." He took a step toward her, raising the knife, and then the world exploded. The main loading door, a solid sheet of corrugated steel, did not open. It was blasted inward as, ripped from its runners by a concussive force that shook the dust from the rafters. It crashed to the concrete with the sound of a falling god. The 2 jackals spun, guns drawn, momentarily blinded by the high-intensity headlights of the Bentley that now filled the entrance. Before they could even aim, 3 figures emerged from the glare. It was not a fight. It was an execution. Lena saw it in disjointed, terrifying flashes. The skinny man raised his pistol. A single, suppressed shot, phut, and a small, dark hole appeared in his forehead. His eyes went wide with surprise. He dropped the knife and collapsed like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The big man roared, firing wildly, the bullets sparking uselessly off the car's armored chassis. The man Lena would come to know as Elio moved left, fluid and fast, firing twice, foot into the man's chest, staggering him. The big man was still standing, clutching his chest, fumbling to raise his gun again, when the 3rd figure walked calmly out of the light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a terrifying, unhurried grace. He did not rush. He walked directly toward the wounded jackal. The tall man did not even raise his own gun. He just kept walking. When he reached the big, dying man, he struck him once, a single, brutal, open-palmed strike to the throat. Lena heard a sickening crunch, a wet gurgle. The big man dropped his gun, grabbed his neck with both hands, and fell to his knees, his face turning a dark, blotchy purple. He suffocated in seconds. The warehouse fell utterly, profoundly silent, broken only by the sound of the car engine idling and the last, desperate spasms of the dying man. The tall man turned. His face was all harsh angles and shadow, but his eyes found hers instantly in the gloom, locking onto her. He walked toward her. Lena flinched, straining against the ropes, pressing herself against the steel pillar. She was trading one set of monsters for another. He holstered his weapon and pulled a combat knife from a sheath on his belt. Lena whimpered, squeezing her eyes shut, bracing for the blade instead. She felt the ropes holding her chest and arms go slack. He had cut them from behind. She opened her eyes. He was kneeling in front of her, the knife already gone. His proximity was overwhelming. He smelled like expensive cologne, leather and the cold steel of his gun. "Are you hurt?" His voice was deep, a rumble. It was not gentle, but it was controlled. She could not speak. She just shook her head, tremors racking her body. He saw the blood on her wrists where the zip ties had dug in. He produced a small, dark tool from his pocket, and with a precise click, the plastic bands fell away. Her hands were free, red and raw. He reached toward her face. Lena flinched again, a violent, full-body recoil. His hand stopped, inches from her skin. "You have a cut," he said, his voice dropping lower, softer. He moved slowly this time. His thumb, the pad slightly rough, brushed her cheekbone. She realized the skinny man had cut her when he tapped her. A thin line of blood trickled down her face. His thumb brushed it away, his touch surprisingly careful. His eyes held hers. They were not kind. They were possessive, furious, and sharp enough to cut. She saw a storm in them, a controlled rage that terrified her more than the jackal's sloppy brutality. Lena's legs gave out. The adrenaline fled her body all at once, leaving her a trembling, boneless wreck. Before she could hit the concrete floor, he caught her. In one fluid motion, he slid a strong arm under her knees and another around her back, lifting her against his hard, solid chest as if she weighed nothing at all. She was disoriented, scared, but wrapped in an impossible strength. A strangled sob escaped her. She buried her face in his shirt, inhaling his scent, clinging to him as he carried her out of the warehouse of her death and into the blinding headlights of the Bentley. He placed her in the plush leather of the back seat. Rocco had already dealt with the bodies. Elio was driving. The boss, the man who had saved her, slid in beside her. He draped his own suit jacket over her shoulders. It was impossibly heavy, lined with silk, and radiated his body heat. They drove through the gates of a sprawling estate, high on the hills overlooking River Haven. The house was a fortress of modern glass and dark stone, a place that screamed power. She was taken to a bathroom larger than her entire apartment, a woman with a kind, wrinkled face. A housekeeper, she presumed, wordlessly helped her clean the blood from her wrists and bandage the small cut on her cheek. She gave Lena a soft, gray silk robe. Lena found him standing in front of a massive fireplace in a vast, dark library. The fire was the only light, casting flickering orange shadows over shelves of books. She stood in the doorway, clutching the lapels of the robe. He turned, a glass of dark liquid in his hand. They destroyed my apartment," she whispered, the words tumbling out, desperate to make him understand. "They were at the diner. I heard them talk about a body. I didn't mean to. I ran." He watched her, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. He said nothing. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice cracking. Why did you save me?" Damien Vascari took a slow drink from his glass. He watched the fire, the muscles in his jaw working. He did not answer her. Not yet. Lena woke to the scent of something she could not place. It was clean, like fresh linen and expensive, subtle citrus. She was not in her apartment. She was not in the warehouse. She was in a bed so large it felt like its own continent. The sheets a thread count so high they felt like liquid silk against her skin. Sunlight streamed through a window that was not a window, but a solid wall of glass, floor to ceiling, overlooking a sprawling, manicured garden that seemed to hang on the edge of the world. Beyond it, River Haven was a distant, hazy smear of gray. Her body ached, a deep, bruised exhaustion, but the raw terror had receded, leaving behind a profound, disorienting confusion. The room was a masterpiece of minimalist luxury. The walls were a soft, warm gray, the furniture dark, heavy wood. There was a walk-in closet, and through an open door, she could see a bathroom carved from marble. This was a place of impossible wealth. Wealth, she knew. That was not built on hard work. It was built on violence, on men like the ones in the warehouse. She was a prisoner in a palace. The silk robe was pooled at her feet. She had been dressed in a simple, soft cotton t-shirt and matching lounge pants, things she would never buy for herself. The kind, older woman from last night, Maria, had left them for her. She padded barefoot onto a rug so thick her feet sank into it. The silence of the house was as heavy as the luxury. It was the silence of power, of total control. It was nothing like the thin-walled, noisy chaos of her apartment building. She found him in the kitchen, a vast, industrial-grade space of stainless steel and black granite. He was standing at the island, reading a physical newspaper, a black coffee mug steaming at his elbow. He wore another immaculate suit, this one a deep navy, the jacket off. His white shirt's cuffs rolled up to reveal muscular forearms dusted with dark hair. A watch on his wrist looked like it cost more than her entire life. He did not look up when she entered, but she knew he had heard her. He finished the paragraph he was reading, deliberately folded the paper, and then, finally, his steel-gray eyes lifted to meet hers. "Maria left you breakfast," he said, his voice the same deep rumble from the night before. She saw a plate on the counter, scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, thick-cut toast. It was more than she ate in 2 days. Her stomach churned. "I can't stay here," she said. Her voice was a dry croak. "Yes, you can." It was not a suggestion. "You don't understand my job, my apartment. Your landlord has been dealt with," he said, his tone flat. "He will not be bothering you again. As for your job, you have been given 2 weeks paid leave, sickness in the family." Lena's blood ran cold. "Dealt with? What did you do to Mr. Sokolov?" Damien Vascari finally gave her his full attention, turning to lean his hip against the counter. He crossed his arms over his chest, a gesture that made his shoulders seem even broader. "I bought the building. You are no longer in danger of eviction, or anything else." She stared at him, trying to process the casual, terrifying power in that statement. He had not just threatened a man, he had erased the problem with money and a threat she could only imagine. "And the Red Jackals?" she whispered. "The men from the diner? They're just gone." "The 2 men from the warehouse are gone," he corrected, his voice hardening. "But the Red Jackals are not Vico Renner. Their leader knows his men were killed. He knows they had a witness. He will not stop until he finds you, or until I make him." He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving her face. "Which brings us to your options. You have one." He set the mug down with a heavy, definitive click on the granite. "You can walk out that front door. I will not stop you. You will be back on the street. You will have no apartment because the one you had is a crime scene, and Sokolov will have it boarded up by noon. You will have nowhere to go, and they will find you. Vico's men will find you before the sun sets, and what they do to you will make what happened last night seem kind." He let the words hang in the air, cold and sharp. "Or," he continued, "you stay here. You stay in this house, under my protection. You do not leave. You do not contact anyone. You become a ghost. In return, you are safe. You are fed. You live. When I have finished with Vico Renner, you are free to go." Lena felt the walls of the kitchen closing in. It was not a choice. It was a cage or a grave. "You're a monster," she whispered. the words out before she could stop them. Just like them. A muscle in his jaw clenched, the only sign his calm had been breached. I am the reason you are alive. They are the reason you were tied to a post. Do not confuse the two. She looked down at her bare feet on the cold stone floor, then back up at his unyielding face. I'll stay, she said, the words tasting like ash. Good. He pushed off the counter. Elio will be your shadow. He's my most trusted man. He will be outside your door, or with you in the room. Do not try to leave. He will stop you, and it will be unpleasant for both of us. And you? She asked, a spark of defiance in her. What's your role in this? Protection? I am the man who owns the cage, he said, walking past her. He paused just as his shoulder brushed hers, his proximity making her skin prickle with a strange, electric heat. I am also the man who holds the key. He left her alone in the kitchen, the scent of his cologne lingering, the silence rushing back in. The next few days passed in a blur of luxurious confinement. True to his word, Elio was always there. He was a silent presence, built like a panther, with dark, watchful eyes that missed nothing. He never spoke, just nodded. When she went to the library, he stood by the door. When she sat by the pool, a place so beautiful it felt obscene, he stood 20 feet away, in the shade. Damien was a different kind of ghost. He was rarely there, but his presence was everywhere. Boxes began to arrive, not from Amazon. From high-end boutiques Lena had only ever seen in magazines. They were filled with clothes, all in her size, soft cashmere sweaters, tailored jeans, simple, elegant dresses, new sneakers, leather boots, and, in a small, unmarked box, a dozen sets of delicate lace underwear. Lena stared at them, her face burning. It felt intimate, violating, a reminder that he had not just saved her. He owned her. He'd seen her file. He knew her sizes. He was dressing his doll. She shoved the box to the back of the walk-in closet and put on the plainest jeans and t-shirt she could find. Maria, the housekeeper, brought her meals on a tray, always quiet, always with a sad, gentle smile. The food was exquisite, but it all tasted like sawdust. Lena and Damien existed in orbits that only occasionally, dangerously, crossed. One evening, she was in the library, pulling a book from the shelf. When he entered, she'd not heard him. He was just there. He was reading a leather-bound ledger at the massive desk, the green glass lamp casting his face in light and shadow. She stood frozen, the book in her hand. He did not acknowledge her, but the air in the room changed. It grew thick, heavy. She could feel the heat of his awareness, a tangible pressure on her skin. She pretended to read the back of the book, her heart hammering an unsteady rhythm against her ribs. After 5 long minutes of suffocating silence, she put the book back on the shelf, her hand trembling. As she turned, her elbow brushed a small, bronze statue on a pedestal. It wobbled, his head snapped up. His eyes, in the lamplight, were dark and intense. He did not move. He just watched her as she fumbled to steady the statue. Sorry, she mumbled, her cheeks hot. He just stared. His gaze was so heavy it felt like a physical touch, tracing the line of her throat, the curve of her shoulder, the hand that was still shaking. She fled the room, his eyes following her all the way to the door. Another time. At dinner, one of the few he took at the house, they sat at opposite ends of a dining table long enough for 20 people. The silence was broken only by the clink of silver on porcelain. She looked up, and he was already watching her, a glass of red wine in his hand. He did not look away, did not smile. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable, assessing. It was the same look from the warehouse, a look of possession. Lena quickly looked back down at her plate, her appetite gone. She wondered what had made him this way. What kind of life forged a man who could kill 2 people with such cold precision and then go home to a mansion on a hill? Damien Viscari was not thinking about the dinner. He was watching the way the candlelight caught the faint red in her brown hair. He was thinking of the way she had looked in the warehouse, terrified but unbroken. And he was remembering. 15 years old. The smell of cheap beer and unwashed bodies, his mother's small apartment in the worst part of River Haven. He had been Damien Vascaro then. No eye, no power, just a skinny kid with fast fists and a simmering rage. He had come home from a double shift bagging groceries to find the door kicked in. Not like Lena's. This was different. He found his mother in the kitchen. She was not crying. She was just silent, staring at the wall. Her face was a canvas of purple and black. Her boss, a small-time loan shark she cleaned books for, had decided she was short on the vig. He had collected the interest in his own way. Damien saw the blood on her split lip, the handprint on her throat. A switch flipped in his 15-year-old mind. The rage that had been simmering his whole life finally erupted. He did not cry. He did not comfort her. He took the kitchen knife, the one with the wobbly handle, and he walked out the door. He found the loan shark in his usual booth at a sleazy bar. Damien did not say a word. He just walked up and drove the knife into the man's throat, pinning him to the sticky vinyl. He had been 2 inches from the man's face when the light left his eyes. That was the night Damien Vascaro died. The night Damien Vascari was born. He had been taken in by the old man, Vascari's predecessor, who saw the cold, useful fury in the boy's eyes. Damien had risen through the ranks, his brutality matched only by his intelligence. He took over the family 5 years ago, and he had one unbreakable rule, one vow he had made to the memory of his silent, beaten mother. No one touches the innocent, not in his city, not on his watch. Sokolov, the Red Jackals, they were the same men, the same monsters. And Lena, she was the same victim. He looked at her now, at the other end of his long, empty table. She was not his mother. She was stronger. But he had made the same promise. He would burn Vico Renner's world to the ground for touching her. A few days later, Lena was restless. The house was a cage, no matter how gilded. She wandered, Elio trailing her at a distance. She found a wing of the house she had not seen, one that held a massive, state-of-the-art gym. She pushed the door open. The room smelled of clean rubber, metal, and sweat. He was there. Damien was in the center of the room, shirtless, his back to her. He was wrapping his hands in black athletic tape. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She should have left. She should have turned around. She could not move. His back was a roadmap of muscle, defined and powerful, gleaming with a light sheen of sweat. But it was not perfect. It was marred. A long, puckered scar ran from his left shoulder blade down to his ribs. Another, a small, circular indentation, marked his lower back, a bullet. He finished wrapping his right hand and turned, sensing her. He was not just fit, he was a weapon. His chest was broad, his abdomen tight and defined. More scars littered his front, pale white lines against his tanned skin. His eyes, when they met hers, were not cold. They were hot, blazing. A charge crackled in the air, thick and sudden. It was the tension from the library, from the dinner table, magnified 1,000 times. His gaze dropped, sweeping over her, the plain t-shirt, the jeans, her bare feet on the mat. It was slow, deliberate, appraising, possessive. He saw her eyes fix on the large, intricate tattoo that covered his left pectoral and shoulder, a dark, stylized raven with its wings spread wide. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of her own heartbeat drumming in her ears. He was breathing heavily from his workout, his chest rising and falling. She felt a strange, terrifying pull, a flutter deep in her stomach that was part purely fear and part something else. Something she did not dare name. He took a half step toward her. Lena flinched. His expression hardened instantly. The heat vanished, replaced by the familiar, icy mask. He turned away from her, grabbed his shirt from a bench, and walked out of the gym, brushing past her without a word. Lena sank against the doorframe, her legs weak. The next morning, she could not take it anymore. The silence, the invisible bars, the man who looked at her like he wanted to devour her and despise her all at once. She waited until Elio was at the other end of the long hallway, watching the garden. She pulled on the sneakers that had been bought for her, grabbed the small, hidden wad of cash she had brought from her apartment, and she ran. She made it to the front door. She fumbled with the complex electronic lock. "I would not do that, Miss Marlowe." Elio's voice was calm, conversational, and he was right behind her. She had not heard him move. She spun around, her back hitting the solid wood door. "I'm leaving. You can't keep me here." "I can," he said simply. He did not draw a weapon. He did not even look threatening. He just blocked her path. "And I will." He said I had a choice. She spat, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "You made your choice," Elio replied, his eyes patient. "You chose to live. If you walk out this door, that choice is revoked. The jackals have scouts watching every road to this estate. They are waiting for exactly this. For you to be stupid, you will be dead before nightfall. Or worse, you will be taken. And what they will do to you to get at Mr. Vascari, you do not want to know." The fight drained out of her, leaving her empty. He was right. She was not a prisoner of Damien Vascari. She was a prisoner of the Red Jackals. Damien was just the jailer. She slid down the door and sat on the floor, burying her face in her knees. Elio stood guard, silent as a statue, until she finally had the strength to stand and walk back to her room. That night, Lena could not sleep. The encounter in the gym, the failed escape. It was too much. She felt the walls of her room, of her life, pressing in. Tears of frustration, of fear, of sheer, hopeless exhaustion began to fall. She hated crying. It was a weakness she could never afford. She fled the room, padding barefoot through the dark. Silent house. She found herself in the library, drawn to the only warmth in the entire cold mansion. The fire was burning low, just glowing embers. She sank onto the thick rug in front of it, pulling her knees to her chest. She did not sob. She just let the silent tears track down her face. She cried for her old life, as miserable as it had been. She cried for her powerlessness. She cried because she was trapped, and the only person protecting her was the most dangerous man she had ever met. "The first time I killed a man, I was 15. His voice came from the darkness. Lena gasped, her head snapping up. Damien was sitting in one of the high-backed leather armchairs, hidden in the shadows. A glass, dark and untouched, was on the table beside him. He had been watching her. He moved, leaning forward into the dim, orange light. He was not wearing a suit, just a black Henley and dark pants. He looked less like a boss and more like a man. He hurt my mother," Damien said, his voice quiet, raw. He stared into the embers, not at her. He put his hands on her, and he thought he could just walk away. He thought he was strong, so I showed him what real strength was. Lena's tears stopped. She just watched him. I never looked back. He continued, his voice a low monotone. "I built this, all of it. I built it on a foundation of fear and violence, just so I would never be that weak, powerless boy again, just so I could protect, so I could stop men like him." He finally turned his head, his gray eyes finding hers in the dimness. "The men who took you, the man who was your landlord, they are the same. They feed on the weak. They take what they want. They are a disease." He paused, the silence stretching. "I told you I was a monster. Lena, I am, but I am not their kind of monster." He had explained. He had given her a piece of himself, a dark, jagged piece. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was stating a fact. She did not know what to do, so she moved. She crawled the few feet across the rug and sat beside his chair, leaning her head against the armrest, near his leg. She was not thinking. It was pure instinct, a response to the shared, broken humanity in the room. After a long moment, she felt his hand, large and warm, come to rest on her head. His fingers threaded lightly into her hair. It was not a caress. It was a claim. And then she did something even braver. She shifted, turning, and leaned her exhausted body against his. She rested her head on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel its steady, slow, powerful beat beneath her ear. She could feel the solid warmth of him, the sheer, coiled strength he held in check. His entire body went rigid. He held his breath for a second, then his arm, the one that had been on her head, moved. It wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her fully against him. His other arm came around her waist, locking her in place. He held her. Not sexually, but with a fierce, desperate possessiveness. He held her like she was the only thing in the world he could not bear to see broken. His chin came to rest on the top of her head, and he just held her. Lena felt something inside her crack. A tiny, fragile thing. She felt safe. For the first time in her entire life, she felt completely, terrifyingly safe, pressed against the chest of a killer. A spark ignited, deep and low. It was the heat from the gym, the tension from the library. But now it was real. It was her skin against his solid warmth seeping into her. It was the scent of him, the clean, masculine scent under the cologne, desire, hot and sharp and confusing, curled in her stomach. She tilted her head back, looking up at him. His eyes were dark, his pupils blown wide. He was looking down at her mouth. His gaze was raw, hungry. He lowered his head. She felt his breath, warm on her lips. Her own lips parted. He stopped, a millimeter from her mouth. A war was raging behind his eyes. She could see it, the hunger, the rage, the self-control. With a low growl that seemed torn from his chest, he suddenly pulled back, breaking the contact. His hands gripped her shoulders, not gently, pushing her away from him. Lena stared at him, confused, aching. "Don't," he growled, his voice rough. "Don't start something you don't understand." He stood, leaving her on the floor, and stalked out of the library without looking back. The night he pushed her away in the library, the house fell into a new kind of silence. It was not the calm, controlled silence of before. It was a brittle, cold tension, the quiet of a pulled bowstring. Lena stayed in her room. He did not seek her out. Elio remained at his post, his face as impassive as the marble statues in the hall. 2 days passed. On the third night, the silence shattered. Lena was reading in her room, the words blurring on the page, when she heard the sound of cars on the gravel drive, not the smooth, expensive purr of Damien's Bentley. This was the sound of tires spitting rocks, of engines roaring in fury. She heard Elio's voice, sharp and low, speaking into a communication device. Then, the heavy slam of the front door, so hard it shook the walls. A voice roared from the foyer, a sound of pure, unrestrained rage that Lena had never heard before. It was Damien. She ran from her room, ignoring Elio's sudden appearance at her door. "Miss Marlowe, stay back." She pushed past him, her heart hammering. Damien was in the center of the massive foyer. He was not the immaculate, controlled man she knew. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt, the one that had been pristine that morning, was torn at the shoulder and smeared with black soot. Blood dripped from a fresh, deep cut on his temple, matting his dark hair. His knuckles were raw. He was breathing heavily, his entire body vibrating with a lethal, terrifying energy. 2 other men, ones Lena did not recognize, stood near the door, also bloodied, looking shaken. "Get Rocco," Damien snarled at Elio. "Find out which of Vico's rats planted the device. I want his entire operation burned to the ground by sunrise. I want Vico. Find him. Now." "Boss, what happened?" Elio asked, his eyes scanning Damien for critical wounds. "Lynott," Damien growled. "He bombed Lynott. 10 minutes after I left the building. He knew my schedule. He meant to kill me." Lena's hand flew to her mouth. Lynott was his flagship restaurant and club, the jewel of his legitimate empire. It was a message. The Red Jackals were not just running. They were declaring war. He saw her then. His eyes, blazing with fury and the adrenaline of a near-death experience, locked onto hers. "Get out," he snarled. It was not a request. It was a razor. "You're bleeding," she whispered, her feet frozen to the floor. "I said, get out," he roared, taking a step toward her. He looked like a wolf, cornered and ready to tear out the throat of the nearest threat. Maria, the housekeeper, hurried in with a silver tray carrying a medical kit. Damien waved her away with a vicious gesture. "Not now. Maria!" The old woman flinched and retreated. But Lena did not. She had been scared of him for days, scared of his power, his coldness, his eyes. But this was different. This was not coldness. This was pain. This was the rage she had seen in the warehouse. But this time, it was directed at the world, not at her. She walked past Elio, who made a move to stop her but hesitated. She walked directly to the tray Maria had abandoned, picked up the medical kit, and carried it into the library. She set it on the massive desk, next to the bottle of whiskey he always kept there. He had followed her, stalking her like a shadow. He stood in the doorway, the light from the hall limning his furious, powerful frame. "I'm not in the mood for games, Lena," he growled. "I'm not playing." She opened the kit, her hands surprisingly steady. She pulled out a bottle of antiseptic and a clean cloth. "Sit down or don't. I'll do it while you're standing." He stared at her, baffled by her defiance. No one spoke to him this way. No one dared. "I saved your life," and he bit out. "I do not owe you explanations. I do not need your help. Leave." "You are bleeding on your floor," she said, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through his rage. She held up the cloth. "You saved my life. Let me stop you from making a mess." Maybe it was the absurdity of her words. Maybe it was the calm determination in her eyes. The murderous tension in his shoulders eased, just a fraction. He did not sit, but he did not move as she approached him. She stopped in front of him, close enough to feel the heat rolling off his body. He was radiating adrenaline and anger. She could smell the smoke and soot on his clothes. "This will sting," she said. She raised the cloth to his temple. The moment her fingers, braced by the cloth, made contact with his skin, his entire body went rigid. He hissed, a sharp intake of breath, but he did not move. His eyes, inches from hers, were a storm of conflicting emotions. She worked in silence, her touch gentle but efficient. She cleaned the blood and glass fragments from the 2-inch gash. He was so still he could have been a statue, but she could feel the tremors of restrained violence running through his muscles. His gaze never left her, watching her every move with a burning, predatory intensity. "They almost killed you," she whispered, her own fear finally surfacing. "They missed." He growled, his voice low. "Because you left 10 minutes early. What if you hadn't?" "But I did." She finished cleaning the wound. His skin was hot. She could feel his pulse hammering under her fingertips. The anger in his eyes was fading, replaced by the same dark, consuming hunger she had seen in the gym, the same heat she had felt before he pulled away by the fire. "Lena," he breathed, his voice rough, a warning, to her, or to himself. She did not know. She pulled her hand away, but he caught her wrist. His grip was not violent, but it was absolute. Steel wrapped in warm skin. He did not let her go. He just held her, his thumb stroking the delicate skin of her inner wrist, right over her pulse. "You are not afraid of me," he stated. It was not a question. "I am," she admitted, her voice trembling. But not right now. That was all it took. The dam of his control, already cracked by the bomb, by the rage, by the fear of Vico's betrayal, finally burst. He pulled her to him. It was not a gentle embrace. It was a collision. His free hand tangled in her hair, gripping the back of her head, and his mouth came down on hers. The kiss was everything he was, hard, desperate, furious, and possessive. It was the taste of whiskey and smoke and blood. It was a claim, a brand, a raw, primal expression of a man who had stared death in the face and had come back, clinging to life. Lena's knees buckled. Her hands flew to his chest, grabbing his torn shirt, holding on as his mouth plundered hers. She did not just kiss him back. She met his intensity, answering his desperation with her own. She was terrified. Yes, but she was also tired of being scared, tired of being alone. He kissed her until her lungs burned, until her mind was empty of everything but him. Then, just as suddenly, he ripped his mouth away. He rested his forehead against hers, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. His eyes were squeezed shut. "Stop," he groaned. I don't want to hurt you." He was shaking. His control shattered. He was a man who built his life on control, and she had just stolen it. I am not gentle, Lena." He was apologizing. He was afraid of his own violence, the same violence that had saved her. Lena looked at his tormented face, at the man behind the monster, and she made a choice. "Then don't be gentle," she whispered, her voice raw. His eyes snapped open. The last thread of his restraint broke, with a growl that was half surrender, half conquest. His mouth found hers again. This was not a kiss. It was a devouring. He lifted her off the floor as if she weighed nothing, his arms wrapping around her like steel bands, and carried her from the desk. Kicking a chair out of his way, he did not take her to the rug. He pinned her against the towering, cold shelves of books, his body flush against hers, his mouth never leaving hers. "You're mine," he growled against her lips. "You've been mine since I pulled you from that warehouse." Clothes fell. It was not slow or romantic. It was urgent. Buttons popped. A zipper rasped. Fabric tore. His hands were everywhere, learning her, claiming her. They were rough, calloused, and surprisingly reverent as they mapped the soft skin of her waist, her hips, her back. She met his urgency with her own, her hands fumbling with his belt, needing to feel his skin against hers. The cool air of the library hit her skin, followed immediately by the burning heat of his. It was intense. It was emotional. He pressed her back against the hard, unyielding wood of the shelves, his mouth leaving hers to trail fire down her jaw, her throat, to the hollow of her collarbone. Her breaths caught in her throat, coming out as small, desperate sounds. Her fingers dug into his shoulders, clinging to him as the world tilted. This was not the tender, hesitant man by the fire. This was the boss, the predator, the man who had faced a bomb and walked away. And he was pouring all of that darkness, all of that power, all of that desperate need to feel alive into her. He held her, his body pressed tight, their skin slick, their hearts hammering against each other. It was a frantic, urgent search for something real in a world of violence and lies. And in that moment, buried in the shadows of his library, surrounded by the smell of old paper, whiskey, and smoke, Lena felt completely, terrifyingly, and wonderfully claimed. When Lena woke, she was in his bed. The sun was streaming through the massive windows, and the sheets were the same impossible silk as in her own room. But this bed smelled like him. She was alone. She sat up, pulling the thick duvet to her chest, her body aching in a new, unfamiliar, and not unpleasant way. The memories of the night came flooding back, the desperation, the heat, the raw intimacy against the bookshelves. She felt a shy, nervous smile touch her lips. She was in Damien Vascari's bed. She found her clothes neatly folded on a chair, but beside them was one of his black Henley shirts. She pulled it on. It dwarfed her, falling to her mid-thigh, and enveloped her in his scent. Vulnerable but hopeful. She padded out of the room to find him. She found him in his office. He was not alone. Elio stood before his desk, his face grim. "It's confirmed, boss," Elio was saying, his voice low and serious. "Say it again," Damien commanded. His voice was not the passionate, rough voice of last night. It was the voice of ice. The intel was solid. The bomb was Vico's, but the timing, the tip-off about your schedule. It came from Sokolov's network. Sokolov's dead, Damien snapped. His network is not, and the chatter we picked up. Lena Marlowe was not a random witness. Damien. She was never random. She was targeted from the beginning. They used her. They planted her. To get your attention, to flush you out, to get you to declare war on the jackals. Lena's blood went cold. She froze in the hallway, hidden from view. Damien was silent for a long, terrible moment. "A pawn," he finally said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "It looks that way," Elio said. "She overhears the one conversation that puts her in danger. She gets her apartment tossed, but not robbed. Forcing her out? She gets taken to a warehouse we can track. It's too clean. Someone used her to get to you." Lena's heart stopped. "No, it wasn't. I didn't." She watched as Damien stood and walked to the window, his back to the room. He looked out over his perfect, manicured lawn, even from behind. She could see the shift. The man who had held her, who had poured his soul into her, was gone. In his place was the mafia boss, the calculator, the man who had just been played. He began to doubt. He had to. His entire world was built on sniffing out betrayals, and this smelled like the worst one of all. He replayed the entire sequence. Her fear in the warehouse. It had felt real. Her defiance when she tended his wounds. That felt real. The way she had surrendered to him. Or was it all an act? A brilliant, perfectly executed performance by a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Lena felt the bile rise in her throat. She stumbled back, retreating to the bedroom. She felt the shift all day. He did not come to her. He did not send for her. When she finally gathered the courage to go downstairs for food, she found him in the dining room, talking on the phone. She paused, and he looked up. His eyes met hers. There was no heat, no passion, no vulnerability. There was only ice, cold, hard, and assessing. He looked at her as if she were a stranger, a problem he had not yet solved. He turned his back on her, still on the phone. "I don't care if she's innocent, he said into the receiver, his voice like granite. "She's a liability. The girl's part in this is over. Handle it." Lena felt the words like a physical blow. A liability. The girl's part in this is over. He had been using her. All of it. The rescue, the protection, the night in the library. It was all a lie. He had used her as his excuse to start a war with the jackals, and now that he had it, he was finished with her. She was a fool, a stupid, naive, pathetic fool. She spun around and ran back to the room, hot, angry tears blurring her vision. She would not cry. She would not let him see her cry. She confronted him that evening. She found him in the library, the scene of her humiliation, staring into the cold, empty fireplace. "Was it true?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a cold fury that matched his. He turned slowly. "Was what true? Was I just a pawn? A liability? Was I just—" "Your excuse. Did you use me?" Damien looked at her. He saw the genuine pain in her eyes, the raw betrayal, and it conflicted, violently. With the intel on his desk, his mind was a battlefield. Is she this good? His suspicion hissed. She's innocent. His heart roared back. He could not tell her the truth, that his enemies had used her because it would confirm she was a pawn, and it would put her in even more danger. He could not tell her she was innocent because in his world, doubt was a death sentence, and he doubted. He was a man who never, ever explained himself, so he gave her no answer. He just stared at her, his face an unreadable mask of cold granite, and then, in the cruelest dismissal of all, he turned his back on her and walked away. That was his answer. Lena stood there for a full minute, the silence of the room screaming at her. He had not even bothered to lie. She was not a toy, she was not a pawn, and she would not be his victim. That night, she waited until 3 a.m, when the house was at its quietest. Elio's patrol route took him to the far side of the estate at this time. She packed a bag. She put on the jeans and the cashmere sweater he had bought for her. She took the $200 she had hidden in her boot. She knew the blind spot in the kitchen garden, near the wall where the security camera had a weak angle. She was not the same girl who had tried to run out the front door. She'd been paying attention. She slipped out of the house, a ghost disappearing into the cold River Haven night. She was finished with him. She would rather face the red jackals on her own terms than be a prisoner in a liar's cage. The cold night air hit Lena like a physical slap, stealing the breath from her lungs. She scrambled over the low stone wall at the edge of the kitchen garden, landing hard on the damp grass outside the estate's perimeter. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She ran. She did not run toward the road. She knew that would be watched. Instead, she plunged into the dense woods that bordered the property, pushing through low-hanging, wet branches that whipped her face and tore at the cashmere sweater. She ran on pure, adrenaline-fueled fury, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the man who had used her, who had called her a liability. The false sense of freedom lasted for exactly 12 minutes. She stumbled into a small clearing, gasping for breath, and ran straight into a solid wall of muscle. A man, not Elio, Before she could scream, a heavy, gloved hand clamped over her mouth, and an arm like a steel vice crushed her against a chest that smelled of cheap tobacco and damp wool. "Look what we have here!" a voice rasped in her ear. "The boss's little pet, off her leash." Another man stepped out from behind a tree, a small, dark pistol in his hand. He was smiling. "Vico's going to be so happy. He thought we'd have to storm the gates to get you." "Shut up and grab her," the first man growled. Terror, cold and absolute, flooded her system, replacing the anger. Elio had been right. Damien had been right. They had been waiting. They had been watching her entire time, like spiders in a web, and she had just walked right into their trap. She fought, kicking and twisting, but it was useless. A thick black bag was shoved over her head, plunging her into a world of suffocating darkness and the smell of old burlap. Her hands were bound behind her, and she was thrown over a shoulder. She was a fool. She had not escaped a cage. She had fled from the only protection she had and delivered herself directly to the executioner. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Damien Vascari stood in Lena's empty bedroom. The sun was just beginning to cast a weak, gray light into the room. The bed, the one she had been given, was pristine, untouched. The silk robe was still folded on the chair. Elio stood at the door, his face a mask of professional failure. The kitchen garden. There was a blind spot in the camera coverage by the west wall. She knew it. She was gone by 3:15. My patrol had me on the east wing. Damien's stillness was more terrifying than his rage had been. He walked to the closet. Her old, worn-out sneakers were gone. The backpack she had arrived with was gone. "She took the cash," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He remembered the $200 listed in her file, the emergency fund she had hidden under her sink. She had taken her money. Not his. She had not stolen from him. She had left him. "Boss," Elio began. "Intel was right. She was a plant. She—" "Shut up," Damien whispered, his back to Elio. He was not looking at the clothes. He was remembering. The way she had flinched in the gym, the way she had leaned into his chest by the fire, the raw, desperate sound she had made in the library when he kissed her, the betrayal in her eyes when she had confronted him and he had given her nothing. "Was I just a pawn? Was I just—" "Your excuse?" He had seen the genuine pain in her, and he had let his pride, his suspicion, and a lifetime of mistrust be his answer. He had let her believe the lie. He had not just walked away, he had pushed her. He had pushed her right out the door and into their hands. "She's not a plant," he growled, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. "She's an innocent, and I just confirmed her value to them." He turned, and Elio flinched at the look in his eyes. It was not the cold fury of a boss who had been betrayed. It was the white-hot, self-loathing rage of a man who had broken his one sacred vow. He had not just failed to protect an innocent, he had personally handed her to the wolves. "Get me one," Damien snarled. "Get me a jackal. I don't care how. Get me one alive. Now." They brought him one an hour later. They dragged him into the soundproofed wine cellar of the estate. He was one of Vico's lieutenants, a man named Tino, snatched from his morning coffee. Damien entered the cellar alone, locking the heavy door behind him. Elio and Rocco heard nothing for 20 minutes. When Damien emerged, his shirt sleeves were rolled up, and there was blood on his forearms that was not his own. His face was a mask of cold, settled purpose. "The old Meinhof slaughterhouse," he said, wiping his hands on a clean white towel. "On the river, south of the bridge. Vico's there now. He's waiting for me." "The crew is ready," Elio said. "We can be there in 20. "No," Damien said. He walked to a black steel cabinet and entered a code. It swung open, revealing a small arsenal. "This is not a war. This is a retrieval. No crew, no backup. Vico is expecting an army. He's not expecting me." He strapped on a Kevlar vest under his black Henley. He checked the magazine on his primary sidearm, a custom-fitted pistol. He grabbed a second, shoving it into a holster at the small of his back. He took 2 extra magazines and a combat knife. "Boss, that's suicide," Elio protested. "They'll have at least a dozen men." Damien turned, his eyes flat and dead. "He took her because of me. He's touching her because of me. This is personal. You and Rocco lock this house down. If I am not back in 1 hour, you burn Vico Renner's entire world to the ground, but until then, she is my responsibility. Mine alone." Lena gasped as a bucket of icy, rust-colored water hit her in the face. She was in a vast, dark room that stank of old blood, iron, and mold. She was tied to a chair, this time a heavy wooden one. The ropes were thick, biting into her wrists and ankles. Her head throbbed. The burlap bag had left her disoriented. "Wake up, little mouse," a voice sneered. A man stepped out of the shadows. He was not one of the men from the diner. This man was different. He wore an expensive-looking suit, but his hair was greasy, and his eyes were small and restless. This was Vico Renner. "You've caused me a lot of trouble," Vico said, circling her. "A lot. You cost me 2 good men, and then you cost me Tino this morning. Viscari is angry, which is good. That's what I wanted." "I don't know what you're talking about," Lena spat, the cold water dripping from her chin. "I'm nobody. I'm just a waitress." "Oh, no." Vico laughed, a high, unpleasant sound. "You're not nobody. You're the girl he almost let burn in a club for. You're the girl he pulled from a warehouse. And now, you're the girl he's going to trade his entire empire for." He leaned in, his face inches from hers. His breath smelled like stale coffee. "See, I don't think you were a plant. I think my men were just stupid. And you were a happy accident, a perfect, beautiful, little accident. Viscari never gets his hands dirty for civilians, ever. But for you, he's breaking all his rules." Lena's heart clenched. He almost let burn? The bombing. He had not left 10 minutes early. He had been there. He had escaped, and Vico knew it. "He's not coming for me," Lena said, her voice shaking but defiant. "He thinks I betrayed him. He's finished with me." "Is he?" Vico smiled, a terrible, thin-lipped expression. He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of her, tied to the chair, her face wet and bruised from the capture. He typed a message. "Let's see. Let's send him a little motivation, Meinhof Slaughterhouse. 1 hour, or she starts losing pieces." He sent the message. "Now we wait." Lena watched him walk away. Her mind was racing. She was not the same girl from the first warehouse. She was not going to sit here and wait to be rescued by a man who hated her. She was not going to be a bargaining chip. She began to work her hands, testing the ropes. They were tight, abrasive, but the chair was old, wooden. She could feel the slight give in the right armrest. She pressed her back against the chair, braced her feet, and began to put all her weight against that one spot. A tiny, rhythmic, unnoticeable push. Push, relax, push, relax. The wood groaned. What was that? One of the guards near the door grunted. "Nothing." Vico called from another room. "Just the building settling." Lena kept at it, her wrists screaming in protest, the rope fibers cutting into her skin. She did not care. She was getting out, or she was dying trying. She was not going to be a victim again. The black Aston Martin, a car built for speed and anonymity, tore through the industrial district, its engine a low, menacing snarl. Damien drove, his hands steady on the wheel, his mind a cold, clear void. There was no rage, no fear, just a singular, burning purpose. Get her back. He parked 3 blocks away and moved through the alleys and shadows like a ghost. He scaled a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, landing silently on the other side. He did not go to the front door. He went to the back, to the loading docks where the cattle had once been led. He counted 7 men, 4 at the front, 2 on the main killing floor with Lena, and Vico, who was in a raised office overlooking the floor. A sloppy, overconfident deployment. Damien moved to the building's main power junction, a heavy metal box on the exterior wall. He pulled his knife, jammed it into the lock, and tore the front panel off. He did not cut the power, not yet. He moved to a side door, a rusted metal slab. He picked the lock in under 10 seconds and slipped inside. He was in a narrow maintenance corridor. He could hear Vico's voice. "I'm getting bored." "Lena," Vico called out, "I wonder what he'll do if I send him a finger." Damien's blood turned to ice. He pulled his gun. He moved to the end of the corridor, which opened onto the main floor. He saw her, tied to the chair, wet, bruised, but her Her eyes were on fire. She was looking at the arm of her chair, not at Vico. She was working. He saw the two guards. One was leaning against a pillar, smoking. The other was pacing. Damien took a deep breath. He stepped out. The first guard, the smoker, saw him. His eyes went wide. He opened his mouth to shout. A single, suppressed shot. Foot. The cigarette was still in his mouth when the bullet entered his temple. He dropped. The second guard spun, fumbling for his gun. Foot, 2 rounds to the chest, a third to the throat. He gurgled, collapsing onto the blood-drained concrete floor. "What the hell?" Vico roared from the office above. Damien did not wait. He ran. He sprinted across the open floor, straight for Lena, as bullets sparked from the office above, Vico firing wildly. From the front, he heard shouts. The other 4 men were coming. Damien did not stop. He reached Lena, spun behind her chair, and began cutting the ropes with his knife. "He's here," Vico screamed, his voice cracking. Get him now!" The 4 guards burst through the main doors, guns blazing. "Hold on," Damien growled. He sliced through the last of the ropes on her wrists, just as Lena finally broke the chair arm, freeing herself. "Down!" he yelled, pushing her to the floor. He shoved her behind a massive rusted steel trough, an old feeding station. "Stay here. Do not move." He turned, vaulted over the trough, and met the charge. It was not a rescue. It was an execution. He moved with a speed and brutality that was inhuman. He fired twice, taking the first man down. He used the second man as a shield, grabbing him as bullets from the other 2 tore into their friend. Damien put his pistol to the man's head and fired, then kicked the body away. All in one fluid motion, the last 2 men hesitated, terrified. That hesitation cost them their lives. Damien's gun was empty. He dropped it, pulling the spare from his back as he advanced. He fired 3 times. Pop, pop, pop. The unsuppressed shots were deafening in the metal-walled room. 3 men down, 6 men in total. Silence. Damien stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving, his gun smoking. Blood dripped from a graze on his arm. He turned, his eyes searching for Vico. The office was empty. The coward had run. Damien let him go. Vico did not matter, not now. He walked back to the trough, holstering his weapon. Lena was huddled behind it, her hands over her head, trembling. He knelt beside her. "Lena." She lowered her hands, her eyes wide with terror, streaked with tears. She looked at him, then at the bodies, then back at him. "You came," she whispered, her voice broken. "You thought I wouldn't," he growled, the words rough, torn from his chest. He reached for her, and she fell into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, holding on with a desperate, crushing strength. He hugged her tightly, one hand buried in her wet hair, the other pressed to the small of her back, pulling her against his Kevlar-clad chest. He closed his eyes, inhaling her scent, the simple, terrifying, overwhelming relief of her being alive in his arms. She broke down. The sobs were silent at first, just her body shaking against his, and then they tore out of her, the sound of a soul that had finally shattered. "I didn't know." She cried into his neck. I heard you on the phone. You called me a liability. I didn't know if I mattered." His grip on her tightened until it was almost painful. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. His gray eyes were raw, stripped of all pretense, all ice. There was only her. "You do," he said, his voice thick. God help me, Lena, you do." That night, they were not in her room or his. They were in his private suite, a place he shared with no one. The lights of Riverhaven glittered far below. He had tended to her wounds himself, the rope burns on her wrists, the bruise on her cheek. He had been so gentle, his rough hands so careful, that it made her want to cry all over again. She sat on his bed, wearing another of his shirts. He came out of the bathroom, shirtless, a fresh pair of dark lounge pants riding low on his hips. The graze on his arm was bandaged. He did not make a move toward her. He just stood there, watching her, the same war she had seen in the library raging in his eyes. She held out a hand. He did not take it. He walked to the bed and sat on the edge, his back to her. What they did to you." He started, his voice a low rasp. "What I let happen to you. You came for me," she said softly, moving behind him. She placed her hands on his broad, scarred shoulders. His skin was warm. "I almost didn't see what," he admitted, his voice full of self-loathing. This world I live in, I let it blind me. I pushed you away. I ran," she said, her fingers tracing the old, puckered bullet scar on his back. "I was a fool." "You were terrified," he countered. "And I let you be. I let you think you were a pawn." "Was I?" "Yes," he said, the honesty brutal. "But not to me, to them. They used you to get to me. They knew. Somehow they knew I would break my own rules for you." He turned then, sitting to face her. He took her hands, his gaze intense. "That will never happen again, Lena." She looked at their joined hands, his, large, calloused, a killer's hands, hers, small and raw from the ropes. There was no passion, not like the library. This was something deeper, something more fragile and more powerful. It was the raw, skinless connection of two people who had been pulled from a wreckage. He lifted her hand and pressed a soft, reverent kiss to her rope-burned wrist. Lena's breath hitched. She leaned in, and he met her halfway. His mouth touched hers. It was not the desperate, claiming kiss from the library. It was soft, hesitant, questioning. It was a promise. It was an apology. It was a plea. She kissed him back, a slow, deep, emotional surrender. He pulled back, his eyes dark with an emotion she was too scared to name. He lifted the duvet, and she slipped under the covers. He followed, his large, warm body sliding in beside her. They did not make love. He simply pulled her against his chest, her back to his front, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. He tucked her head under his chin. She could feel his heart, beating slow and strong against her back. His skin was warm against hers. It was the most profound intimacy she had ever known. She lay there, listening to him breathe, feeling the rise and fall of his chest, surrounded by his strength, his scent. The terror of the slaughterhouse began to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary sense of safety. She was about to fall asleep, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion, when his voice rumbled against her ear, low and absolute. "You're mine now, Lena," he whispered into her hair. "No one touches what's mine." The morning after the slaughterhouse was heavy with a new, unspoken reality, the fragile peace of their shared silence, of holding each other in the dark, evaporated with the daylight. Damien Vascari was a man of action, and Vico Renner was still breathing. He gathered his inner circle in the library, not the capos, just his most trusted Elio, Rocco, and 3 others. The mood was not angry, it was cold. It was the cold of a deep-sea trench, pressurized and absolute. "Vico Renner is a rat," Damien began, his voice a low, even rumble that filled the vast room. "Rats are smart about one thing, survival. He ran from the slaughterhouse because he was sloppy, and he was overconfident. He will not be sloppy again." He paced in front of the cold fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. He broke the rules. In our world, there is only one rule that separates us from animals. We do not touch the innocent. We do not bring civilians into our business. He did. He used an innocent woman as bait, as a pawn, and as a target. This is not about territory anymore. This is not about business. This is about a message. He stopped, his gray eyes sweeping over his men. "We will end the Red Jackals, not just Vico. We will end his name. We will burn every safe house, seize every asset, and break every man who ever took his money. We will salt the earth so that nothing bearing his name ever grows in this city again." From the doorway, a voice, quiet but clear, said, "I want to help." Every man in the room turned. Lena stood there, wearing the black Henley he had given her and a pair of dark jeans. She was pale, the rope burns on her wrists a stark, red reminder, the bruise on her cheek a faint purple. But her eyes were not the eyes of the girl from the diner. They were hard. Damien's expression tightened. "Lena, this is not for you. Go back to your room. Elio will be with you." "No," she said, taking a step into the library. "I am not your prisoner. Damien, not anymore. I'm the one he took. I'm the one he tied to that chair. Twice. I'm the one he's going to use as a target until one of you is dead. I'm not going to hide in a bedroom waiting for the next man to come over the wall." Damien's jaw clenched. "You are not a killer. I will not make you one." "I don't want to be a killer," she said, her voice shaking slightly but holding firm. "I want to be a survivor. You're talking about sending a message. He used me as a message, so let me deliver the reply." The men looked at Damien, waiting. To see such defiance was new. "Deliver it how?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. I don't know," she admitted. "But I won't be helpless. I won't be the bait in the trap. I'll be the trigger." He stared at her for a long, silent moment. A war raging behind his eyes. The protector versus the pragmatist. What I am about to do. The men I am hunting. If they see you, they will not hesitate. "Then teach me not to hesitate either," she countered. He dismissed his men with a sharp gesture. They filed out, Elio pausing at the door, his gaze lingering on Lena with a new, grudging respect. When they were alone, Damien walked to his desk. "No, Damien. I said no," he repeated, his voice absolute. "I will not put a gun in your hand. I will not be the man who turns you into me. And I'm not the girl who is going to be tied to a chair for a third time," she shot back, her voice rising. "You saved my life, but you don't get to decide how I live it. Not anymore. You put a target on my back. You have two choices. Teach me how to shoot or chain me to the bed, because I am done being helpless." He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, the sheer, unbending will. It was the same will that had her working the ropes on that chair in the slaughterhouse. He had seen it. With a low, defeated growl, he nodded. "Basement. 10 minutes." The shooting range in the basement was soundproofed, clean, and smelled of gun oil and brass. He did not give her one of his heavy, custom pistols. He laid a small, compact black semi-automatic on the metal shelf. "This is a .38, he said, his voice all business. "It's small, easy to conceal, hard to aim, but it will stop a man at close range." He stood behind her, his proximity making the air thick. "Pick it up." Her hand trembled as she reached for it. It was heavier than she expected. Cold, it was an object of pure, final purpose. "Your grip is wrong," he said. He placed his large hands over hers, repositioning her fingers. His touch was firm, impersonal, but it sent a jolt through her. "Both hands, thumbs forward, lock your elbows, but not rigid. You let the recoil come through your arms, not your wrists." He stepped back. "Aim at the center of the target." She raised her arms, the gun shaking violently. "You're scared of it," he said. "Of course I'm scared of it." "Good," he said. "The day you're not, you've lost something important. Squeeze the trigger, don't pull it." She closed her eyes and fired. The explosion was deafening. Even with the ear protectors he had insisted she wear, the recoil slammed her arms back and she stumbled, dropping the gun. It clattered to the floor. She stared at it, her heart hammering. "Pick it up," he commanded, his voice unrelenting. "I can't. Pick it up." She fumbled, her hands slick with sweat, and retrieved it. "Again," he said. "Damien, I can't." "Again, Lena. Or you go back to your room and I chain the door." She raised it, fired. The shot was wide, missing the paper target completely. "Again." She fired again and again. She fired until the magazine was empty and the slide locked back with a hollow click. Her arms ached. The smell of burnt powder filled her nostrils, acrid and sharp. "Reload," he said, pushing a fresh magazine toward her. She fumbled with the release, her hands shaking so badly she dropped the empty magazine. He said nothing. He just waited. She finally slammed the new one home. "Again," he said. She fired for an hour. She fired until her hands were numb, her shoulders burned, and the target in front of her was a shredded mess of paper. Her hands were still shaking, but the gun was steady. He finally put his hand on her shoulder. "That's enough." She lowered the weapon, her body trembling with exhaustion. "This is not for offense," he said. his voice softer now. "This is not for hunting. This is for the man who gets past me and gets past Elio. This is for the last 5 seconds. You aim for the center of the chest. You empty the magazine. Do you understand?" "I understand," she whispered. He took the gun from her, his fingers brushing hers. "I pray to God you never have to use it." The tension in the house grew thicker over the next 2 days. Damien was ruthless, but he was not stupid. Vico had run, which meant he was scared, but Vico had also known his schedule, which meant he was smart. "Vico didn't get my schedule from one of his gutter rats," Damien said to Elio, the two of them in his office. "He got it from someone on my payroll. One of your men," Elio stated, his face grim. "Or one of my cops," Damien said. He made a call. An hour later, a man in a rumpled suit arrived, Detective Riley. He was thin, with a nervous energy and eyes that had seen too much. He was also, as Lena gathered from the snippets of conversation she overheard, deeply in Damien's pocket. "You're right, Mr. Vascari," Riley said, accepting a glass of whiskey. "The jackals are trash, but they're not coordinated. They got a clean tip. We tracked the burner phone that made the call to Vico's lieutenant. The signal pinged from a tower 2 blocks from your own garage." Damien's blood went cold. "One of my men. It came from inside the house, so to speak," Riley confirmed. "You've got a mole, and a sloppy one, if he used his own phone's tower." The news ripped through the estate. Damien's men, who'd been focused on the external threat of the jackals, suddenly began looking at each other. The air was electric with suspicion. Every conversation was whispered. Every look was a potential accusation. Damien was a stone. He watched everyone. He reviewed security logs, visitor lists, and financial records. On the 3rd day, the tension broke. Damien summoned his entire security detail, 12 men, to the large, empty garage. Lena, watching from the kitchen window, felt a cold dread. Damien stood in the center of the concrete floor. Elio and Rocco flanked him. "One of you," Damien said, his voice echoing in the space, "sold me to Vico Renner. You sold my schedule. You sold my life. And you sold the life of the woman I am protecting." The men were silent, rigid. "Antonio Salgado," Damien said, "a man in the back, a man Lena recognized, one who had smiled at her just yesterday, went pale. You've been skimming from the shipping manifests for 6 months," Damien continued, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Vico found out. He blackmailed you. You gave me up to save your own skin." "Boss, I swear," Sal stammered, his hands raised. "I didn't—" "Do not lie to me," Damien roared. "Rocco found the burner phone in the vents of your locker. You sold me. You sold her." Sal broke. He lunged for his gun. He never cleared the holster. Elio moved, firing a single unsuppressed shot from his own pistol. The sound was flat, final, a full stop. Sal collapsed to the concrete. Lena flinched, her hand flying to her mouth, stifling a scream. The garage was utterly silent. Save for the echo of the gunshot. "This," Damien said, his voice shaking with cold rage as he looked at his remaining men, "is the price of betrayal. This is what happens when you threaten my family, or what is mine. Get him out of my sight and find Vico." The brutal, swift justice terrified Lena, but it also solidified something inside her. This was the world she was in. There was no middle ground. There was no normal. There was only survival. That evening, the house was quiet, the heavy pall of the execution still lingering. Lena was in the garden, the small pistol Damien had given her heavy in the pocket of her jacket. Elio was at the end of the patio, his back to her, speaking into his earpiece. She was trying to breathe, trying to forget the flat pop of the gun. He shouldn't have done that. Lena spun around. A man was there, not 10 feet away, not one of Damien's men. He was thin, strung out, wearing a dark hoodie. He must have come over the wall while Elio was distracted. "Sal was a friend of mine," the man hissed, his eyes wide and frantic. He held a long, glittering knife. "Vico's paying double for the girl." He lunged. Elio heard her scream and turned, drawing his weapon. "Lena?" But he was too far. There was no time to think, only to react. All the hours in the basement, all the fear, all the rage coalesced into one single moment. Lena stumbled back, pulling the gun from her pocket. Her hands were shaking so violently she almost dropped it. "Get back!" she screamed. The man laughed, seeing her tremor. "You're not going to—" She pulled the trigger. The shot was wild, loud in the twilight air, blasting a chunk of stone from the pathway near his foot. The man froze, his eyes wide with shock. She was crying, her body convulsing with terror, but she raised the gun again, both hands, just as Damien had taught her. She aimed it at his chest. Her hands were still shaking, but her finger was steady on the trigger. "The next one won't miss," she sobbed. The man looked from her to the gun, to Elio, who was now sprinting toward them, his own weapon raised. The man scrambled backward, turned and vaulted back over the wall, disappearing into the night. Lena collapsed to the grass, the gun falling from her nerveless fingers. Damien burst from the house just as Elio reached her. He saw her on the ground, saw the gun, saw the terror in Elio's face. "She's fine, boss," Elio said, his voice shaky for the first time. "He came over the wall. She held him. She saved herself." Damien walked over and knelt in front of her. She was on her hands and knees, hyperventilating. He gently pushed her hair back from her face. She was not the girl from the diner. She was not the victim from the warehouse. She was a survivor. He looked at her, and the last of his doubts, the last of his armor, melted away. He saw her strength, and it was the most beautiful, terrifying thing he had ever witnessed. That night, he found her in the library, staring into the fireplace. He had a drink in his hand, but he was not drinking. "I almost killed him," she whispered as he approached. "You saved your life," he corrected, his voice quiet. He sat on the rug beside her, close enough that their knees touched. She turned to look at him. "This is my life now, isn't it? Guns, moles, executions in the garage. This is my life," he said. "I dragged you into it. I pulled the trigger," she said. "You survived." He reached out, his hand infinitely gentle, and cupped her jaw. His thumb brushed the fading bruise on her cheek. "You are the strongest person I have ever known. Lena Marlowe." The raw, unguarded admiration in his eyes was more intoxicating than any kiss. The air between them, which had been fraught with suspicion and violence, now softened, charged with a different, deeper emotion. This was not the desperate, urgent need of their first encounter. This was something built on mutual respect, on shared trauma, on the undeniable fact that they were now bound together. He leaned in, and his mouth found hers. The kiss was slow, tender, almost hesitant. It was not a claiming, it was a question. She answered, her lips parting under his, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel its steady, heavy beat. He pulled back, his eyes dark. "I want to see you," he whispered, his voice rough. "Not in the shadows, not in a rush." He stood, pulling her to her feet. He lifted her into his arms, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, her arms around his neck, burying her face in the warm skin of his throat. He carried her up the stairs to his room, the same room where they had held each other after the slaughterhouse. He did not turn off the lights. He left a low lamp burning, casting the room in a soft, golden glow. He set her down gently, and his hands came up to frame her face. "You're sure?" he asked. "I've never been more sure of anything." She breathed. Their coming together was a slow, deliberate act of worship. His hands, the same hands that had taught her to fire a weapon, were now impossibly gentle. He undressed her slowly, his gaze reverent, as if he were memorizing every inch of her. His mouth followed his hands, leaving a trail of soft, warm kisses along her collarbone, her shoulder, her arms. It was not the frantic, possessive act from the library. This was a claiming of the soul. He was not just taking, he was giving. He was pouring all the tenderness he kept locked away, all the vulnerability he never showed, into her. And she, in turn, met him with an open, trusting heart. She clung to him, her skin alive under his touch, her body arching to meet his. It was a slow, passionate connection, a quiet, desperate affirmation of life in a world obsessed with death. Later, they lay tangled in the sheets, the cool night air drafting through the open balcony door. Lena was curled against his chest, her head resting on his shoulder, her fingers idly tracing the intricate lines of the raven tattoo. "Could we ever be normal?" she asked, her voice small in the quiet room. Damien was silent for a long time, his hand stroking her hair. He looked at the glittering, indifferent lights of Riverhaven far below. "Normal was never in the cards for me, Lena," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "This life, it doesn't have an exit." She sighed, pressing a small kiss to his skin. "I know. It was a stupid question." "No," he said, his arm tightening around her, pulling her even closer. "Not in this life. But if I had the choice, to live 1,000 normal lives or just this one, with you," he kissed the top of her head, "I'd still choose this." She was about to reply when the phone on his nightstand vibrated, a short, sharp buzz, a text message. Damien's entire body tensed. Lena felt it instantly. The peace was shattered. "What is it?" He sat up, grabbing the phone. His face, which had been so soft, hardened back into the mask of the boss, all cold angles and granite. He looked at the message, then at Lena. "It's over," he said. Getting out of bed, he pulled on his pants, his movements swift and economical. Elio just got a location. A crooked detective on Vico's payroll finally flipped. He strapped on his shoulder holster, his back to her. "Where?" Lena asked, sitting up, pulling the sheet to her chest. Damien turned, his eyes the color of cold steel. "Vico Renner. He's hidden in a port warehouse downtown. He's run out of places to hide." The port of Riverhaven was a dead, sprawling skeleton at 3 a.m, a graveyard of steel and shadows. The only sound was the wind whistling through the cranes and the distant, lonely lap of water against the docks. Damien Vescari moved at the head of his crew. 12 men, including Elio and Rocco, all clad in black, all armed to the teeth. They were a silent, professional army. Lena was 2 blocks away, locked in an armored Suburban, a radio clutched in her hand. Damien had given her a direct order. "You do not move. You do not listen. You wait." He knew she would listen. The warehouse was a massive, corrugated steel box, number 42. The intel said Vico was inside with a skeleton crew of 6, his last remaining loyalists. "Rocco, you take the east door with your team," Damien ordered, his voice a low command over the private comms. "Elio, with me. We go through the roof. Silent entry. We box him in." "Copy, boss." Elio's voice was calm in his ear. Damien and Elio moved to a maintenance ladder, ascending into the darkness. They cut a hole in the roof with practiced, silent precision and descended on cables, landing like ghosts on the high rafters. Below them, the warehouse floor was a maze of shipping containers. It was too quiet, too dark. "I don't like this," Damien whispered, his eyes scanning the blackness. "Where are the guards?" "Boss," Rocco's voice crackled, suddenly tense. "East door is wired. It's a try—" The world exploded. A concussive blast ripped the east door from its hinges, sending a fireball of shrapnel into the night. On the comms, Rocco screamed, then his line went dead. "Ambush!" Elio yelled. Bright, blinding floodlights snapped on, illuminating the entire warehouse. Men. Not 6, at least 30. They poured out from inside the open shipping containers, from behind stacks of pallets. They were armed with automatic weapons. "It's a kill box," Damien roared. "Rocco, status!" Only static answered. Gunfire erupted from every direction. The high-pitched, terrifying crack of automatic fire echoed off the steel walls, a deafening drumbeat of war. From the rafters, Damien and Elio were exposed. Perfect targets. "Down!" Damien yelled. They half jumped, half fell to the top of a container below, bullets pinging off the metal where they had been seconds before. "We were sold out," Elio yelled, firing a controlled burst at 3 men advancing on their position. "The detective." "It was a setup." "Worry about that later." Damien fired 2 precise shots and 2 men fell. He was calm, his movements economical, his face a mask of cold, lethal focus. "We need a new exit. Where's Vico?" "There." Elio pointed. On a raised catwalk near the back, Vico Renner stood, watching the chaos, a manic, triumphant grin on his face. He was not running. He was orchestrating. He played us, Damien snarled. He wanted us all in one place. A new sound joined the chaos, the sharp crack of a sniper rifle from a high nest. One of Damien's men on the floor below, caught in the open, crumpled. "Sniper, high west!" Elio yelled. He pushed Damien, shoving him hard toward the edge of the container. "Get to cover, boss!" "Elio, no!" Elio stood, raising his own rifle to fire at the sniper's nest. He gave Damien 2 seconds of cover. It was enough. Damien dove. A single heavy thud and Elio grunted, his body jolting. He looked down. A dark, spreading stain was blossoming on his chest. He looked at Damien, his expression one of surprise, then crumpled to his knees and pitched forward. Off the container. "Elio!" Damien's roar was not a name. It was a curse. A primal sound of rage and loss. He forgot cover, forgot the plan. He leaped from the container, landing hard on the concrete, and ran to his friend. Rocco, his face black with soot and bleeding from a cut on his head, was suddenly there, dragging Elio behind a massive forklift. He's breathing, boss. The vest." It might have caught most of it. The battle was a blur of chaos. Damien's men were professionals, but they were outnumbered, outpositioned, and trapped. It was not a fight. It was a massacre. In the Suburban, 2 blocks away, Lena sat in the dark, the radio clutched in her white-knuckled hand. She had listened to it all. The calm orders, the explosion, Rocco's scream, the gunfire. And then, Damien's roar, a sound that had ripped through the static and clawed at her soul. "Elio is down, I repeat, Elio is down," someone shouted over the radio. "Boss, you're hit. Where is Vico? I want Vico's head. It's a setup. We're pinned. Fall back. Fall." The radio line went dead, dissolving into a high-pitched whine of static. Lena stared at the radio. No. She had his order. Stay in the car. Wait, she had his promise. I'd still choose this. She thought of the slaughterhouse, of him kneeling in her blood and tears, his face raw with an emotion he would never admit to. She thought of her own gun, the one she had fired in the garden. She was not a victim. She was not bait. She was his. "He's not dying in there," she whispered. She grabbed the small .38 pistol from the glove compartment, the one he had trained her with. She checked the magazine, just as he had shown her. Full? She opened the heavy door of the Suburban and ran, her sneakers pounding the pavement. She ran toward the sound of war. She was terrified. Her body was one giant, convulsing tremor. But she did not stop. She moved through the maze of containers at the edge of the port, the sounds of the battle growing louder, closer. She slipped through a partially open loading door, the one Rocco's team had been meant to take. The smell of cordite and blood hit her, gagging her. The warehouse was a charnel house. Bodies, some his, some theirs, were scattered across the floor. She saw Rocco, his massive frame huddled over Elio, trying to stop the bleeding, a pistol in his other hand, firing blindly at advancing shadows. And then she saw Damien. He was across the floor, leaning heavily against a steel support pillar. His black shirt was soaked, a dark, wet patch spreading across his side. His face was a mask of blood from a cut above his eye, the crimson dripping down his cheek. He was breathing in harsh, ragged gasps. His gun was at his feet, empty. Vico Renner stood in front of him, his suit pristine, a satisfied, sadistic smile on his face. He held a gleaming silver pistol, the barrel pressed firmly against Damien's temple. "The great Damien Vascari!" Vico sneered, his voice dripping with triumph. "Look at you, bleeding out on my floor. I told you I'd take everything from you, your business, your men, and now..." Vico's eyes drifted past Damien, and he saw Rocco, pinned down, trying to protect Elio. "And now your family. You won't live to see the sunrise." Damien growled, his voice a low rasp. "I think I will," Vico said. "I'll be the king of this city by then. All I had to do was leak a little intel to the right people. Let the Vascari family tear itself apart looking for a mole. Sal was just a bonus. The detective was my real inside man. He set this whole party up for me." Vico leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Any last words, boss?" A shadow moved at the edge of the warehouse, a flicker of motion. Vico heard it, a faint scrape. "Who the hell is that?" he snapped, annoyed, thinking it was one of his cleanup crew. Damien saw her. His eyes, which had been slitted with pain and rage, went wide, not with relief, with pure, unadulterated terror. "Lena, no, run!" Vico's head snapped back. He saw her, standing 20 feet away, illuminated by a single, flickering floodlight, the girl from the diner. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, but her arms were raised, both hands gripping the small black pistol. It was shaking so violently it looked like it would fly apart. "Well, well," Vico laughed, a high, reedy sound. "The little mouse. Come to die with your king. This is perfect. He gets to watch you go first." Vico turned the gun from Damien's head and aimed it at Lena's chest. Damien surged, a desperate, last-ditch lunge, but Vico slammed him back against the pillar with a brutal pistol whip to the face. Damien slumped, his body sliding down the steel. "Touch her," Damien growled, his voice thick with blood as he looked up from the floor. "Touch her, and I'll bury you." Vico mocked him. "You'll what? You'll bleed on me? You're finished. Damien, and she—" He turned back to Lena, leveling the pistol. "Back away," Lena said. Her voice was a thin, reedy squeak. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Vico mocked. "I said," she said, her voice suddenly finding its steel. "Back away from him!" Her hands were still trembling, but her gaze was not. It was a fixed, cold point of fury. She was not the girl from the diner. She was not the victim from the warehouse. She was the woman who had held a gun on an attacker, and meant it. Vico was genuinely thrown. This was not in the script. The defiance, the fire, it distracted him. He took a half step toward her, lowering his aim slightly. "You think that little—" It was the only opening Damien needed. He exploded from the ground. He was not a man. He was an animal. He moved with a speed that should have been impossible for a man so wounded. His hand clamped onto Vico's wrist, the one holding the gun. Lena heard a sickening, wet snap. Vico screamed, a high, shrill sound, as the pistol clattered to the concrete. But Vico was a fighter. He drove an elbow into Damien's wounded side. Damien roared in pain but did not let go. Instead, he drew the combat knife from the sheath on his boot and slammed it, hilt deep, into Vico's shoulder. Vico howled, trying to pull away. Damien ripped the knife free and kicked him in the stomach, sending him sprawling. It was not a clean fight. It was a brutal, ugly, desperate brawl. Damien was wounded, slow, but he was fueled by a rage that was almost chemical. Vico was fast, a street fighter, but he was in pain. His arm broken, they rolled on the ground, fists and elbows, grunting, gasping. Lena stood frozen, the gun still raised, unable to shoot for fear of hitting Damien. She could only watch, horrified. As the two men tried to tear each other apart, Damien got on top. He pinned Vico's good arm with his knee and raised his fist. He was panting, his face a mask of blood and sweat. He slammed his fist into Vico's face, once, twice. The sound was a dull, wet thud. He raised his fist a third time, ready to end it, to crush Vico's skull. He paused. He looked at Vico's broken, unconscious, bloody face. He looked at his own hand, covered in Vico's blood. Then he looked up and saw Lena. She was watching him, tears streaming down her face, the gun still shaking in her hands. He saw his own violence reflected in her terrified eyes. He saw what this world was doing to her, what he was doing to her. His fist, raised for the kill, slowly unclenched, he spat, a thick glob of blood and saliva onto Vico's ruined face. "You're not worth the bullet," he rasped. "You're not worth the time." He pushed himself off, his body screaming in protest, and stumbled, falling to one knee. "Damien!" Lena ran to him, dropping the gun, catching him before he fell. "Rocco!" Damien yelled, his voice ragged. "Get Elio! We're leaving!" "Boss! Cops!" Rocco's voice came from the shadows. The explosion must have tripped a silent alarm at the Port Authority. In the distance, the first faint wail of police sirens began to cut through the night. Damien grabbed Lena's hand. "We're not going to be here when they arrive." He half limped, half ran, pulling her with him. They met Rocco, who was carrying Elio's unconscious body over one shoulder like a child. They vanished into a dark maintenance tunnel at the back of the warehouse, disappearing into the guts of the city just as the first blue and red lights flashed across the concrete floor. Weeks later, the city was a blanket of apricot and violet light. The sun was setting, bleeding its colors into the River Haven skyline. The sounds of traffic were a distant, muted roar. They were on a rooftop, a private penthouse garden that was not on any record. It was one of Damien's true safe houses. Damien stood leaning on a simple, black cane. He wore a soft gray Henley and dark pants. His limp was pronounced, but the doctors had promised temporary. Elio, alive and recovering, was in another safe house, complaining about the bad television. Lena stood beside him, her hair longer, her face fuller. She was not the hollow-eyed, weary girl from the diner. She was watching the sunset, and for the first time since he had met her, she was smiling, a real, peaceful smile. "We'll never be safe, will we?" she said, her voice quiet. It was not a question of fear. It was a statement of fact. She turned to look at him. "We'll always be looking over our shoulder. Vico's in prison, but his men, your rivals." "I know," he said, "but I've never felt safer than with you." She moved, stepping into the space between him and his cane, pressing her body against his. He looked down at her, the setting sun catching the red highlights in her hair. His gray eyes, which had seen so much violence, were soft. He dropped the cane. It clattered silently on the stone tiles. He pulled her onto his lap as he sat on a cushioned bench, his arms wrapping around her waist, holding her securely as if she were the only anchor in his world. She settled against his chest, her head fitting perfectly under his chin. He kissed the top of her hair, inhaling her scent. "Then I'll keep burying anyone who threatens that," he said. His voice was a low, unshakable promise in the twilight. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more, and we would be honored if you shared your thoughts about the story with us in English.